Hey, good afternoon. This is Jason Isaac, founder and CEO of the American Energy Institute, Carbon King, as Senator Raskin from Maryland likes to call me, because I live a high carbon lifestyle, and I think the rest of the world should too. Joined today with our economist and CEO of PetroNerds, Trisha Curtis. Thanks for joining us for our live stream. I think we've got rid of the echoes this week, so hopefully you'll be able to hear us more, I guess, audibly. Hopefully we'll have some improvement there. But thanks so much for joining us. This will be available on our YouTube. I think it's streaming on my X right now, maybe on Facebook and LinkedIn, but we will get it posted so that you can view this, because you're going to get some great insight from one of the best economists when it comes to shale, when it comes to global geopolitical issues regarding energy. And so let's kick things off. Trisha, let me turn it over to you. It is June 26th, Thursday. I'm getting the dates right now, maybe not in my emails. We are at 3:02 Eastern time. What is oil trading at right now?
Yeah, so we've had a lot going on in the oil world, and we are at 65.58 right now for oil. So WTI is just over 65 bucks. If we tried this live stream last week, and we were talking, which we'll have to talk about this again, about the Iranian conflict, the Iran-Israel tit for tat back and forth, and then we had the ceasefire, and so we had oil prices move up to over $75 a barrel, on around June 12th. And then we've had this everything in the stock market, everybody's talking about is this massive sell off in oil. So, firstly, oil was oversold before June 12th, and now we're kind of back in this oversold territory. But right now at 65.58, we're looking at, oil is, I wouldn't say coming back, but so we're into this, so folks are now thinking about supply and demand again. We're thinking about the economy. I just want to note for people before we get into the Iran and Israel stuff is that, if you see oil pull back and you see the stock market go up, you need to ask yourself, why is oil pulling back? Because oil is pulling back because the economy is not hot. And if the economy is not hot, your stock market should not be going up. So the stock market is just looking for ways to like move higher. And I'm not calling for like a 2008, but it just feels a lot like that, of like, oh, we just keep, going back. And the fact that we just had a major conflict in the Middle East, we have an ongoing war with Russia and Ukraine, and that the stock market is ratcheting to all-time highs, of the S&P above like 6,000 and change. It probably closed above that today. I mean, I think this is total BS. Like, the stock market is not, like, these companies should not have these evaluations. We have a lot of stuff kind of going on under the hood. And I do think a lot is there's a lot of wait and see on this big, beautiful bill and what's going to be in it and what's not going to be in it. And a lot of hope about, what this can do. And I'm very optimistic about what Trump can do to the economy. But I don't think he can save the world from recession.
That's great. I appreciate that. Let's just jump right into the global conflict. I think when we tried this last week, I don't know, had dropped some bunker busters on Iran. Maybe it had just happened.
No, we hadn't. No, it happened over the weekend.
That's right. Okay. So we've had a 12-hour war, 12-minute war. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the global conflict and what impact that's having on energy markets. It seems like, and I know you've been quoted in several media pieces over the last few days about this, one talking about the resilience of the American shale industry and how we shouldn't feel the pain. And it turned out you were absolutely accurate with that comment. Let's elaborate on that a little bit, if you will, and let's talk about those issues.
Yeah, so and I think Chris Wright was interviewed before, at the beginning of this conflict, June 12th. I think Chris Wright was interviewed right after that, or around that, and so he was saying, okay, they were like, hey, what's going to happen to oil prices? And he said, look, we have a really well supplied market. The U.S. is producing 13.5 million barrels per day as of March, like, just impressive figures, and so we are in a better position globally to actually have conflict because we're well supplied. We're well supplied with oil, so it gives the U.S. a lot of opportunity. Like, it gave us the fact that we're producing 13.5 million barrels a day gave Trump, confidence and comfortability from an energy standpoint to go ahead and drop bombs on Iran. Now, in our previous one, I said, we should take Iran back to the Stone Ages, and I am very pleased with that. We took bunker busting bombs, and these are these bombs from B2s that we have. They're really, it's really fascinating. It looks like something from Top Gun, right? Because these bombs actually tilt at an angle and they go underground, and you hit them multiple times. If you watch Top Gun, you would know that that's the thing, because my nieces watched it over and over. But it's very impressive. This is not something that these pilots, these folks have taken lightly. Like, we practiced this over and over and over again. So it went off without a hitch. It was really, really impressive. These planes came out of Missouri. They went over to Iran. Obviously, they had to be refueled in the air, but then they came back. they probably should have been flying from a Qatar airbase or Bahraini airbase, which means we needed to be talking about what's going on within the Middle East of why that didn't happen. But it was very impressive nonetheless. So, June 12th, Israel attacks Iran, and I would say they brought the war to them, because everybody talks about Israel just, bringing on conflict. No, they had a massive attack on them on October 7th, 2023, where 1,200 people were killed overnight in hours, in really, really horrific, awful ways. And so they've had years of Hamas and Houthis and Hezbollah attacking them. And so really this was Israel saying, we're done, we're tired of this. And I think the intel on Iran having nuclear capabilities was significant. In the weeks preceding this, we had seen the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, come out and say very clearly that, hey, look, they have 60% uranium enrichment, and 60% uranium enrichment is effectively 90%. So you're really, really close to getting a bomb. And the stated ambitions of Iran with a nuclear bomb is to wipe out Israel, from the river to the sea is literal. They want to get rid of this country. And you've commented that, the comments against the West, the comments against the US are huge. So the intel was rich. They had uranium enrichment. They were building a bomb. And, Iran, or Israel, when they did these strikes on June 12th and the preceding days, they took out a lot of missile defense capacity within Iran, the ability for them to both defend themselves but also strike. And so that was really impressive, is that when we came in there then over this past weekend and dropped these bunker busting bombs and hit their nuclear facilities, they weren't able to respond very effectively. And that was obviously part of the calculus. So it was a really, really impressive campaign. And I am a little bit shocked that oil prices just tanked massively on Sunday as a result of this. Basically, the world, the stock market looking at this and saying the conflict is over and we have no more problems with Iran and it's done and dusted, which is kind of hilarious because it means they haven't thought about conflict in the Middle East. But I'll pause there and let you ask questions and we can dive in a little bit further.
Yeah, great. Because it seems like over the last week, we've seen oil go from 75 to 65 in that range. So that's a pretty significant swing. By some accounts, I think some people thought that 75 was going to go to 150 or 200. I mean, I heard stuff on the media, people saying that oil was going to go to 150 and that Americans were all going to be paying through the nose for gasoline. It was going to shut down our economy. And then, like you said, we saw a drop off on Sunday.
Yeah, and I think we have to be careful with that, because I've never quite, I want to say I've never quite heard this bad a commentary. I've not heard really good commentary on oil, really some pretty crap commentary. I was up staying up really late on Sunday, looking at everything. And, the experts that came on, I heard pretty varying numbers. I just want to make this clear to listeners. Oil prices were well oversold prior to June 12th. So you put a geopolitical risk premium back on prices at $75 a barrel. Now, I am concerned with the health of the consumer and the U.S. economy, that if we had gone to 80, that would be pretty painful for the U.S. consumer and the global economy. These 140 kind of were ridiculous. Like, you have to physically take barrels off the market to actually have an impact on oil. So amazingly to me is the fact that we have these ongoing conflicts. We have $65 oil today, and we just hit them with bunker buster bombs. And yet in January, when we said we were going to put sanctions on Russia and barrels did not come off, oil prices went to 80. So clearly you have a lot of trading, you have algorithmic trading, and you have fingers on the sell button. Now folks are looking at recession again. Right now they're looking at concerns about supply and demand. And let's just talk about supply and demand. Iran produces about 3.6 million barrels per day right now. It's a crap ton of oil for Iran. They've really increased in the last several months. We should talk about Trump's tweet. I'm not a big fan of saying that we're not going to sanction this crude and letting China have it, because Iran has been funding Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis. They've been funding all these attacks on Israel from this money that they get from oil that they get from China, okay, that China gets at a discount. So China gets the benefit and Iran gets the benefit, and they're super good friends, and it's awesome, and it's a load of horseshit. We should not be allowing China to buy this, discounted crude, and we should be strangling the funding that's going to Iran, because they spend it on nefarious things like the three evil H's: Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis. They also take that money and fund their nuclear program. So unless you're completely confident that Iran is not going to try to rebuild a bomb, which I think they probably will like to try to rebuild one, then you have to take away their funding. And so you hit them, and then you say, okay, now let's talk. And I get where Trump's coming from with that, but I think the ability to just let them fund this is wrong. So that 3.6 million barrels per day, that's a lot of crude oil. And I think what we also saw is that in the weeks preceding this and time around this, Iran has actually put a lot of oil on the market. So right now we have a lot of oil probably on the world market, some of it coming from Iran. And then the threats of closing the Strait of Hormuz 20 million barrels a day goes through that. So 20 million barrels a day, if you threaten that, obviously that's a geopolitical risk premium. That didn't happen. It's actually never happened in history. Iran voted to actually do it, but it didn't happen. So that's also, though, we're seeing natural gas up a little bit. We're seeing geopolitical risk a little bit on natural gas. I mean, if you're looking at European natural gas prices, they're $12.41. They were as low as $10 in April. They were as high as 17 in February. And so I still think actually natural gas for Europe is feeling this a little bit, because if anything is to happen within the Middle East to restrict natural gas, it would hurt Asia, and then it would hurt Europe. So there's just a lot of pieces going on here. And, what we hear in the news is like sound bites from like, the Strait of Hormuz or things, and nobody's actually talking about supply and demand and how much they actually produce and what's at risk.
Yeah, and you've got about, I think, 25%, 23% of the global supply of natural gas, LNG, goes through the Strait of Hormuz global supply, and most of that's heading to Asia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's about, because Qatar produces roughly as much as, I mean, they export roughly, we produce way more. We produce over like 130 billion cubic feet per day, but we export about 14 BCF a day. And that's what Qatar is exporting, about 14 billion cubic feet per day. Australia is exporting about the same amount. And so Asia is the dominant buyer, right? They're the first buyer of liquefied natural gas. So Qatar, most of that's going to Asia. And so then the marginal buyer, the second buyer is Europe. So the price spikes are could impact that. And so much of that Qatari LNG, that 14 BCF a day, is going through the Strait of Hormuz and would impact Asia. I think you've heard China being pretty mute on this. They took a day or so to respond and say, hey, we're not a fan of you dropping these bombs on Iran, obviously because they support Iran. So I think we have to, sort of let the dust settle. And I am, I'm a fan of a lot of stuff that the Trump administration has done. I would like him to be much more hawkish on China. I thought that, what he said to the media, though, we're gonna give this a 2-week, we're gonna wait 2 weeks, and then we'll have this conversation with Iran, and then he drops these bombs. It was a really, really effective campaign. I mean, the fact that this was secret, no one knew about it, and then we just did it. I really do think when you talk about peace through strength, you have to be willing to actually do something like this. It was very targeted. We did not get civilians, and we basically said we are going after your uranium enrichment. It was very impressive, and I think it's really nice to show the world that, one, we're willing to do it, and two, we know how to do it. And so I think it's a nice message to both Russia and China that, hey, don't mess with the U.S. We are capable of doing this, and we just show you how precise we can be with it. So it's not a bad thing to show off our capabilities every once in a while.
It was, just stealth. I mean, it was just so awesome. The decoy planes flying halfway around the world in the other direction, taking off from Missouri, refueling multiple times in the air, very little communication happening while they're in the air. I mean, just these pilots are just, there's just no other way to put it than badass. I mean, it's just awesome.
No, absolute badasses. It's really, really impressive. And I do think that's the stuff that you think about this. I mean, Russia and China are looking at this, and they're studying this and saying, wow, okay, like, can we do that? And you have to have a lot of, effectiveness. I mean, we can criticize our government all day long. There's a lot of bureaucracy, there's overspending and everything. But when it comes to this, we are very, very good at stuff like this. And it's because we have the technology, but it's also because we have the cream of the crop and incredibly good people. And I know I've heard like commentary on Fox and stuff about this, but I mean it, because when you meet some of these people, they're just amazing. And so for them to execute like this, it's nothing short of pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's like, I know that we just celebrated the 250th anniversary of the United States Army on June 14th, had big parades to celebrate that. Interestingly enough, those parades were planned during the Biden administration. So everybody called it Trump's parade, but they were touting their record recruiting numbers that they've already set for 2025. I'm sure that's only going to increase after this, and the pride that people feel, in our Air Force and the work that they were doing. I want to get back to something you touched on, because you said a number that was kind of alarming to me. $12, I think, for natural gas is what Europeans are paying. What's that compare to what the natural gas spot price is here in the United States?
We're a fraction. So we're at $3.31 right now for 1,000 cubic feet, or an MCF of natural gas, and they are at $12.41. So we talk about the delta in the price and how expensive their electricity prices are. It's so huge. Like the fact that they can't manufacture, the fact that the auto industry is just, is being decimated within Europe because of their high energy prices, but also because of the exposure to China. Like, energy, I mean, this is what it comes down to. So it's hugely, hugely important. And I know we're going to touch on this a little bit later on just, the role of energy and refining and everything, but it's so important. So $3.31, ridiculously cheap. And that's partly because if you look at the numbers of US gross withdrawals in March, we're at 130 billion cubic feet per day of gross withdrawals of natural gas production. That's all-time record high, just incredibly massive number.
That's absolutely just crazy. That's amazing. Do they have natural gas in Europe? I mean, do they have underground? Is there natural gas there on that continent?
There's a crap ton of it. They just don't want to pull it out of the ground.
I mean, this is what the energy transition is about, in my opinion, because they're still using record levels of energy. They're losing manufacturing. I've got a video in here. I want to play this real quick. So this is one of my favorites.
Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course.
That was during the prior administration. And I showed this presentation earlier this week in Colorado at the Rocky Mountain Mining Institute. I showed that video. And it's like, if Germany could be powered by smug, they would have an unlimited supply.
Oh, I love that their faces and they're like waving their heads and
yeah.
It's like you are completely exposed. And this is so important. This is why I really want to highlight this. And if I have a chance to educate the administration on this, I really want to, is because, Trump was very clear and very knowledgeable about, Russians, the exposure of Germany and Europe to Russia's energy. He needs to be equally adept and knowledgeable about China and energy and our exposure to China, and like the fact that energy is what fuels what China's doing. So I think it's amazing. Like, I love that clip. I love that, he was ahead of that. And they were so exposed, but that's because Germany and all these countries went down the path to say, we're going to buy this natural gas from Russia. We're not going to produce it ourselves because that would be evil. And that's what Biden did, right? Is like, we'll buy it from Iran, we'll buy it from Saudi, we'll buy it from all these countries who have no human rights laws, who don't care about, environmental pollution or anything about these things, don't have rule of law. We'll buy it from them. We won't produce it at home. And someday we'll get off this stuff, which is a load. It's just crap. So, so that's what I mean. And that's what Germany was doing, right? They were buying all this natural gas from Russia, so they didn't have to produce it themselves. They were still using some of their coal, and then they were adding renewables like crazy. And now what happened was, with this war, I think in the US, we all thought these guys were kind of going to wake up and they were going to buy our natural gas, and they were going to realize that natural gas was the end all be all, and like put your flag in the ground and like it's natural gas. They're not doing that, and they're doing it to an extent, right? They're in some cases they're not decommissioning nuclear. They are using a lot of coal in a lot of coal-fired power generation in Germany. But the problem is that they've forced these renewables into their grid so much, the wind and solar. And as we've talked about before, there is nowhere in the world where you put wind and solar into a grid, especially when you decommission a baseload power, which is what happens in Germany and the UK and the US. When you take out coal or you take out natural gas or nuclear and you add wind and solar, your energy prices go up. And so that's what Europe has felt, is that they just see rising and escalating electricity prices, which is just crushing the consumer, and it's crushing businesses. And people can say, oh, well, look, they're having a renaissance now. This is so great because Trump's at NATO this week, and all the talk you're hearing on the news is the fact that Trump has gotten NATO to commit 5%. And so years ago, they were laughing at him to say, hey, NATO, you need to pony up the money and go to 2%. You have nations not committing 5%, Spain's not, but 5% spending. And so everybody's excited. You're going to have this renaissance, and everyone's going to spend on military. Great. You have to have power generation to make that stuff, to make the ammunition, to the tanks, everything. You have to have power. You know who's really good at that? China, because they have a lot of coal-fired power generation and they can churn this stuff out. And so the thing that people are not talking about is the energy to make the things that make your industrial base, your ability to be a military power. You have to have energy. We have that as the US, and we are threatening it with stupid BS in this bill, on this big, beautiful bill of that we're going to keep subsidizing this green energy. And we need to get rid of that immediately. And we need to be telling Europe, hey, if you want to make this stuff to do it competitively so you don't bankrupt your country, you have to have natural gas and coal in your grid. You just have to.
Yeah, and you've got some great material that I use in my presentations that talks about how much electric generation China is adding, predominantly from coal. They've got 100 nuclear power plants planned or under construction. The United States has 3 under consideration. And then they're adding at least 1 to 2 coal-fired power plants every single week. I joke in front of Congress repeatedly. It's like, of all the technology the Chinese steal from us, it would be nice if they would utilize our pollution control technology. They don't care about the environment.
No,
they don't care about human rights. That's where over 60% of the pollution in Southern California is Asian air pollution. We increase regulations like what California is doing. All we're doing is exporting jobs and importing pollution. We need to be reshoring that manufacturing here back to the United States, but we need the power to do it. That power is electricity from hydrocarbons, natural gas, coal, and nuclear as well. But we're just so far behind, and we just can't dump money into it. Like that's the thing. You look at the Vogtle power plant in Tennessee, the last nuclear expansion that we have, 2.5 gigawatts, cost $35 billion. And I'm a huge nuclear proponent. We've got to get the regulations out of the way, but do an equivalent amount for natural gas is $2 billion. We need to be doing cost benefit analysis when we're looking at these things, and hopefully the capital will flow in that particular area. But still, I just can't. We're paying less than, or Europe is paying 4 times more for natural gas than we are, because they won't produce it themselves. That's crushing their people. Freezing deaths are on the rise in Europe, by the way. That's what's necessary. But that gives us a good transition. We talk about the wind and solar, and Chris Wright called them a parasite on the grid. He's our Secretary of Energy, a former CEO of one of our members, Liberty Energy. I think he's the best person in the administration to be fighting for affordable and reliable energy. But I want to play this clip real quick of Liz Clayman on Countdown on Fox Business.
Because as of right now, the bill would repeal tax credits for clean production and investments put into place by the Inflation Reduction Act. It also would accelerate the phase out of green tax credits. It repeals certain transfer provisions so your companies won't be able to sell their tax credits to other companies. And lastly, it adds new restrictions to companies trying to claim energy credits that have relationships with, quote, prohibitive foreign entities.
Hallelujah.
I love all of that.
I know. I love all of that. That's what people voted for last November. That's what we need in America, is American energy dominance. That is the path to American energy dominance. That was the House version. The Senate version has completely gutted all of that. It is absolutely appalling that we're still going to be paying tax subsidies for electric generation from variable Chinese dependent sources through 2040. I joke that by the time President Trump exceeds his time in office of that of FDR, we're still going to be paying subsidies. I'm joking. I know some people on the left are like, oh, he wants to be president forever. No kings.
Hey, Jason, can you just let me know those senators that are supporting repealing that? Because those are the ones when I'm just going to move up to the place that they're, and I'm going to run against them in 2026. Because those are the ones the Republican senators that are supporting, putting this stuff back in the bill. Like, shame on you. This is what drives me nuts, is that they clearly know nothing about economics. They know nothing about the economy. They know nothing about the consumer. They know nothing about energy. So it's really disgraceful. And I wish, we just had a call. We were talking about this. We need to be talking more about energy and like how the role of energy in the economy. It is everything. Energy is everything, but also like power generation. So all this stuff in the bill, no one's discussing this because no one on TV actually understands energy. So the reason it's so important, and Jason, we've been talking all summer about, the defeat you've had in Texas on not getting this stuff out of the grid. And the fact that, every time I go down to Texas, I have to remind these guys, you guys lead in wind and solar in Texas. And that's partly because you have all the natural gas, but it's crushing the consumer because we have all this natural gas. We have all this coal. We have more than any nation in the world. 130 billion cubic feet per day of production is more than a quarter of the world production and consumption of natural gas. We have zero excuses to have high and rising electricity prices, which we do. It's over 18 cents a kilowatt hour. It's rising every month. It's ridiculous. And so this is what's amazing, is in the House bill, they were going to take all this stuff out. And then you heard all the whining coming out of North Dakota and all these rich people it actually comes down to all these lobbyists and wealthy people who have their ties in their hands into this solar and wind. Nobody makes money except for the companies and the people doing this, because once it gets into the grid, the consumer pays a lot. And this, I have to say this because I saw this in the Denver Business Journal, and people know this, like I would die poor if I could just go after the utility companies and end what they are doing to the consumer. Because we talked about that $3.30 for natural gas. We're getting charged like $18 by the utility companies. That's what they're charging the consumer on average last year. So it's highway robbery. They're not passing that on. But this is amazing because Xcel Energy is one of the worst. I mean, they're just a really bad actor in the space. And so they're talking about energy companies warn of layoffs, price hikes. This is in the Denver Business Journal. And so it says Xcel Energy, Vestas execs say budget cuts threaten their business. So they're worried that if they get these subsidies pulled out of the big beautiful bill, that they and they actually say, quote, eliminating all of the consumer tax credits, it's almost like an assault on consumers. Are you kidding me? An assault on consumers. This is from Namaste Solar. The CEO said that. That's not an assault on consumers. The assault on consumers is the fact that we don't have anyone advocating for the consumer in Colorado, that whenever Excel wants a rate hike, it just gets passed through. The assault on consumers is the fact that when we shove this wind and solar into the grid, the electricity prices go up. If the consumer just had, if we had the price, decreases of natural gas passed along to the consumer, we would have lower electricity bills, given that 40% or 50% of our grid is the natural gas, and we would have affordable, reliable, and redundant power generation that we could actually compete with China. This all on consumer. It's amazing because it is Xcel Energy is one of the worst offenders of shoving wind and solar into the grid and having these rising and escalating electricity prices in the U.S. at the same time of cutting 1/3 of power generation out of the Colorado grid, which is all coal-fired power generation, taking it out and seeing that increase. So it's really amazing the fact that they are so threatened by these subsidies when they say it's the cheapest form of energy. And if it's the cheapest form of energy, well, in hell, put it into the grid and see what happens. It's not,
Exactly.
and it's, they can't even afford it themselves and they need these subsidies. And, they're clearly making a ton of money because the CEO of Xcel made $24 million last year. So they're not doing too bad. And I am just, I'm really, really angry with utility companies and the fact that they're allowed to get away with this.
Yeah, and they pass the cost on to consumers. They're guaranteed a rate of return,
Yep.
but who they're not passing the cost on to may alarm some people that are listening, because you realize we're subsidizing them with our tax dollars. We're also subsidizing them with higher utility rates, up 28% over the last 4 years in Texas alone. I think the national average is just below that, somewhere in that same range, 25% over the last 3 to 4 years, higher cost of electricity. That's how you deindustrialize a country. I was on the Kevin Freeman's Economic War Room on Blaze TV. We were recording a segment yesterday talking about this very certain thing. I'd written a piece earlier this month for The Hill titled American Energy Still Held Hostage by Paris, and a quick look at Xcel Energy. They have Paris-aligned commitments
Absolutely.
to be net zero by 2050. You look at their top 3 shareholders. It's Vanguard, it's BlackRock,
Yep.
it's State Street, the big 3 financial institutions which control a vast wealth, trillions of dollars of investable wealth. They go in and they buy shares of these companies. I've got a letter that I'm sending to the new comptroller of the state of Texas here this week, because they removed BlackRock from the boycott list, but they're still voting their shares against fossil fuel producers. They're voting against over 120 directors of fossil fuel companies because they're not aligning with BlackRock's climate political agenda. They're still boycotting fossil fuels. They're still boycotting hydrocarbons, which does nothing to mitigate a changing climate. It just makes everything more expensive, as Europe is finding out. 4 times the cost for natural gas that they can produce themselves for the same prices that we're paying here in the United States. Maybe not producers responsibly or economically, but still get closer and cheaper than $12. But that's their onus. They've embraced this political agenda. Just this morning, oilprice.com shares an article, but with the same thing that Xcel's talking about. They're threatened by the loss of these tax credits in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and they're saying that battery storage is booming in the U.S., up 15 times since 2020 as costs drop and deployment accelerates.
So ridiculous.
But GOP-backed bill could slash production by 75% by 2030, jeopardizing 130,000 EV jobs. So I got into the article, and one of the headlines is they print the bullet point: the cost of solar paired with batteries is now competitive with new natural gas and coal plants. So if that's true, why do they need credits for battery energy storage systems? They're called BESS, EVs, or solar. Why do they still need me to pay higher taxes and higher utility rates for them? And lastly, because the thing that I wrote in the article was talking about these power purchase agreements. You've got woke companies. I call it woke OGA. You've got the oil and gas associations around the country, woke OGA.
I love that.
They've gone out and along with big tech and big manufacturing, these industrial users of electricity have done power purchase agreements. And I remember the first time I heard about this, I saw a commercial. It was a Budweiser commercial back before they had Bud Light issues, but Budweiser bragging during the Super Bowl how they're 100% powered by, wind and solar, renewable.
We should have known then. We should have known then about them.
Yeah, like that company was tanking then. This is, probably 7-8 years ago, if not longer. And I mean, Oh, they're not. They're connected to the grid. They're not 100% renewable, but what they were doing is they were buying electricity equivalent to what they use a year from a renewable supplier. You look at the wind and solar on the grid in Texas, 100% of its capacity is locked up through power purchase agreements.
Right.
Well, if any legislation changes, this is where we were fighting, woke OGA, we were fighting the manufacturers, the industrials. I say we, a coalition of people that want the consumers to pay less for energy, kind of the American energy dominance agenda of President Trump. We're fighting these big industrial users because they recognize if there's any change to any legislation about the reliability of the grid, then it triggers pass-through provisions in their power purchase agreements. And companies like Electric de France, that's 100% owned and controlled by the French government, that sells subsidized solar energy and wind energy here in the state of Texas, it triggers those pass-through provisions and they come back and get to renegotiate. So they're going to pay higher costs for electricity because it's actually going to be reliable, and that's going to cost wind and solar more money, and the ratepayers aren't going to be paying it. But right now, the residential ratepayers and small business owners, people that don't get the ability to do a power purchase agreement, are subsidizing woke OGA, the big manufacturers, industrial users of electricity, along with increasing our tax burdens with the subsidies. And the Senate doesn't get this. They won't take it out of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The House needs to fight to keep this in there. Our senators, like Senator Mike Lee, who was reposting some stuff this morning about getting rid of every single subsidy in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It truly will be beautiful if they do that.
Yeah. So you make really, really good points, Jason. And I think if people need to really understand this, the reason that this is there's so many reasons this is bad, but it's that when wind and solar, which is it's unreliable and intermittent power. So one, like, you're buying it from China, it's subsidized, it's made with forced labor, it's made with coal-fired power generation. These are grave human rights abuses to make this stuff, okay? And so you say State Street, Vanguard, and BlackRock, they're all complicit in grave human rights abuses in the province of Xinjiang. They're on boards in the province of Xinjiang. They know exactly what is happening up there. And they do all this kind of incredible subsidization and stuff with human rights abuses, with forced labor to actually make this stuff. So they know exactly what's going on, and they are horrible offenders of what's happening around the world. And China's at the cornerstone of this. But then when we get to actually putting this power in the grid, this is, the fact that, when companies are explaining we're going to have job layoffs or we're going to have problems because we don't have these subsidies anymore, well, then it doesn't stand on its own, because wind and solar power, it only works when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing. And when it gets really, really hot outside in Wyoming, the wind turbines don't blow anymore. And yes, when the cloud cover, then you don't have the sun. And that's what makes it so expensive. And so for the everyday consumer, just to realize, if you're listening, wind and solar power is intermittent and unreliable. So when you're comparing on a levelized cost of energy, which everyone tries to do, you cannot compare apples to apples to nuclear or to coal or to natural gas. Nuclear, coal, and natural gas, you can stack up all together because they are not intermittent. They are extremely reliable, affordable, and importantly, dispatchable forms of energy. And so when we are aggressively pulling out, like in Colorado, and the fact that this article, and people don't understand this, when you're pulling coal-fired power generation out of the grid, which we have done, and you have the charts that I give you to show. When you're pulling that out of the grid and then you're adding wind and solar, that's when you get the cost increases, because not only do you get the intermittency in this expensive wind and solar, but then you have pulled out that reliable, dispatchable baseload power, which is also extremely cheap, by the way, and then you lose it. And so we should not have a problem with this in the U.S. So we have to absolutely get rid of these so we can change the power purchasing agreements. And so I just have to read a quote to this from this article. Again, this is from the Denver Business Journal. This is June 6th through 12th, 2025. And this is this article. And I just want to read this for a second so you can understand this. Quote, Xcel Energy Colorado, the state's largest power utility, could see renewable energy construction projects spike in cost, said Robert Kennedy, president of Xcel Energy Colorado. Quote, the loss of production investment tax credits, ... would increase the cost of these projects for our consumers, end quote. Kennedy told Bennett, summarizing Xcel Energy's support of the IRA clean energy tax credits. These are Inflation Reduction Act tax credits that came from a completely partisan bill, of trillions of dollars of spending that is absolutely ridiculous, that got shoved in the past administration, which directly contribute to inflation ongoing now. And you have somebody that the fact that he says this contributes to consumer costs, that is only because he passes it along to the consumer. That is ridiculous. How about he takes a pay cut and pass me the decrease in natural gas prices, which he saw all year with $2 natural gas prices last year when he charged $18 to the resident. It's highway robbery. It's wrong. It's criminal. This needs to be addressed. And the first thing is take this damn stuff out of the bill, get the pork out, and do exactly what this is doing. I mean, I am fired up about this. I'm deeply passionate, and everyone else should be too, because this is the stuff that will actually increase your or decrease your what you're paying. The consumer will actually see the decrease. This will help manufacturing. This will bolster the U.S. I talk about AI. I talk about businesses wanting to invest in the U.S. You do it by taking wind and solar out of the grid.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing some movements in the right direction. I mentioned earlier, I was at the Rocky Mountain Mining Institute conference earlier this week outside of Denver. Got to see a presentation from Mike Nassy, an attorney, longtime environmental attorney with Jackson Walker. And he talked about, there was one slide in there that really stuck me, and I took a picture. I wish I could share it here. But this slide that showed a list of all the coal-fired power plants in the United States that were scheduled for early retirement have been paused. Over 40 coal-fired power plants are on pause for early retirement. And the reason they were scheduled for early retirement, or just retirement in general, even though their lives could have been extended, is so that these companies like Xcel can meet their net zero commitments.
Yep.
Because companies like BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, again, have voted their shares to implement these shareholder resolutions through the proxy process to tie their compensation to meeting those climate goals, to align with the Paris Agreement. So Xcel's happy to pass along the cost to consumers because they get a guaranteed rate of return. CEOs making millions of dollars. American Electric Power Company is another one. They shut down a coal-fired power plant in East Texas. It could have lived for another decade or more. The loss of nearly 350 jobs. Another plant in Louisiana, over 450 jobs, like 2 gigawatt power plant for coal with a mine right next door to it. I mean, this is, you talk about low transportation costs. You put in a rail car and you essentially push it across the street into the power plant, and you're providing affordable, reliable.
And it's like $2 to $3. It's like $2 to $3 an MMBTU. It's so low price and so competitive, and it's this affordable, reliable, dispatchable power. It is not just jobs are really important, folks, but it's the jobs that from power generation that make your economy investable. And so it's really important that it's not just the jobs of, okay, you lost some battery jobs. I'm sorry, those battery components, they come from China anyway. So you know what? And we're not competitive on that because they're just not that competitive. So Namaste Solar, I shout out to them, but like you're still getting the ingot wafer from China. You are not making batteries or wind turbines or solar panels without China. So maybe we should be getting out of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Chris Wright nails it on the head.
I've never supported all of the above because if something's going to make energy more expensive and less reliable, I'm not for that.
Amen. And that's
so
exactly
awesome.
what's happening to our grids around the country right now as things are getting more expensive and they're getting less reliable. Again, we've become world leaders in clean air in this country because we embrace things like pollution control technology, innovation. We've reduced pollution, the 6 criteria pollutants, nearly 80% over the last 5 decades. That's something that a lot of people don't know. They have no idea that we're world leaders in clean air. They have no idea that when we took half the cars off the road during the COVID lockdowns, that our air quality did not improve in this country. In fact, some cities saw a decline in air quality with half the cars off the road. Industry at a standstill. The air quality in China and India improved significantly during that short economic downturn because manufacturing was offline. They just don't care about pollution control technology, environmental protection, and human rights in those countries. And it's really unfortunate. I know during the first Trump administration, I was actually advocating for a thing called the Pittsburgh Accord. The president said, I represent the people of Pittsburgh, not Paris, when he pulled out of the Paris Accord. And I thought, gosh, let's just do a Pittsburgh Accord. Let's call on our trading partners to meet air quality standards that improve human health. We've gone way beyond that here in the United States, and they're too strict, and they need to be loosened a little bit. And I'm glad to see some efforts within the Environmental Protection Agency when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, those things that are necessary for life on Earth that have nothing to do with a changing climate. They're pulling back regulations on that to reduce the cost to produce affordable and reliable electricity. The mercury air toxin, the MATS, they're pulling back on that to, again, provide affordable and reliable electricity. I think the administration's moving in the right direction, and that's a good direction to be going, in my opinion. Especially when you look from 2022 to 2023, there was 5 million people who lost access to their primary utility. It was a 30% increase in people getting disconnected from electricity, a 76% in people getting their disconnected utility from natural gas because they can't afford it. Expensive energy hurts the poor. That's 5 million people that are the precipice of homelessness. And you think about it, because when you buy a home, when you have a homeowner's insurance policy, there's one thing that you're required to do in that other than pay the bills, and that's to have your utilities connected. When you sign a lease at an apartment or really anywhere, you're required to have your utilities connected. And when you don't have utilities connected because you can no longer afford to pay them, you are at the greatest risk of homelessness. Expensive energy hurts the poor. This administration, from what I'm seeing so far, is moving things in the right direction. We've got to get the Senate to go along to get rid of these credits that just benefit China and hurt everyday Americans with higher cost for electricity. Tricia, any closing thoughts here before we wrap up in just a couple of minutes?
I mean, I would just say that, I think your comments on the Paris Climate Accord are really good in that, people have to realize this translates to investment. So, and I always like to bring this back to the market and to your members and to people thinking about that. It does, because when Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, he gave a signal to the markets that we're investable, right? We're now investable. You can invest in publicly traded companies without this burden. And so those things do matter if we pull this stuff out of the big, beautiful bill, if we actually pull these things out, we start changing the ability to invest again in one, just stopping the decommissioning of coal-fired power generation, allowing more natural gas-fired power generation, and realizing that, you cannot compete as a nation. Households are huge, but you cannot compete as a nation. Sorry, one second. You cannot compete as a nation unless you actually have affordable and reliable power generation. And so what China is doing is they're able to, they have 5,700 terawatt hours of coal-fired power generation. We don't even have 1,000. And so, the reason they have coal-fired power generation is because it's so cheap and it's so reliable and they have so much energy security in it. And so you're not going to be able to compete against them in now or in the long term unless you actually have this. So that's an immediate thing that has to be solved. But I thought that, what Chris Wright's saying, what he's doing is fantastic. I mean, and the administration, they're trying to do this within the big, beautiful bill with what the House is doing. The fact that this stuff gets put back into it. Also, it's really expensive, right? These are costs. This is government savings when you take these subsidies out. So it's just really, really important to get it right. I mean, you cannot underscore and underline that enough. I know in future podcasts, we need to be talking, more about power generation and more about coal and more about natural gas, but really, really, really important to get this right, because you've got these chances and the fact that you're just going to keep putting in this pork in the future. And we should start looking at the people who are advocating for this. If you're advocating to put this stuff back, ask yourself, who are they aligned with? Are they aligned with you, the American consumer? Or are they aligned with themselves and their own pocketbooks?
Yeah, and they talk about the economic harm to those 130,000 jobs. Those are an inefficient use. It's a misallocation of resources and capital. I want to wrap real quick here with this quote or this short video from Chris Wright speaking at a Breitbart event recently.
But I say to Republicans and conservatives, read the data, look into this thing. It's a real thing. Your kids are all hopped up on it. So you want to be reasonably knowledgeable. You want to be able to engage with them. I go to universities, and Extinction Rebellion is protesting when I arrive on campus. They're holding a funeral for Mother Earth. And at the end of a talk I gave at CU Boulder, I have a line of people for internships, jobs. Kids believe climate change is near the end of the world, but presented with data and facts. And then you show them, like, here's the climate, here's what we know about climate change, here's what's happened so far, no increase of extreme weather, which is one of the punchlines too, despite endless proclamations of everyone. That's just the data. Then I talk to kids about, today we have 1 billion people that live like us, and 7 billion people that want to live like us. They want to wear fancy clothes made out of oil and gas. They want to travel on buses and cars and planes. They want to have light switches in their house and heating and cooling. Only 1 billion have that. 7 billion want to have that. We have to have massively more energy in this world. 2 billion people cook their daily meals the way our ancestors did, burning wood or dung indoors. 2 to 3 million easily preventable deaths from that indoor air pollution. And at the Congress of the Party, the climate gathering in Glasgow a few years, the 19 wealthy nations of the world pledged not to lend any more money in the developing world for hydrocarbon development. No, they don't want propane stoves for those 2 billion people so they can live longer, healthier lives, so women can be liberated and don't have to gather wood and sit over smoke-filled fires, but can actually turn a stove on and turn a stove off. Like, it is, the world has gone crazy on climate change and net zero. The facts say completely different actions are warranted.
it boggles my mind. And this is what people don't understand. And he's talking about, right, you should have these conversations with your kids, with family members. We're world leaders in clean air. Expensive energy hurts the poor. And I'll have to show a video another time of Senator Kennedy saying, you don't know, do you, about what does it do? What does it do if we decarbonize? Because it does nothing. It just makes everything more expensive. And that's what people should be asking their kids. Well, why do you want to do this? What does it do? And the kids be like, well, I don't know. Because it doesn't do anything. But you've got 7 billion people on the planet that want to live like we do, want to have access to affordable and reliable energy, running water out of a tap and lights at the flip of a switch, but they don't have that. And you've got the 19 wealthiest nations refusing to allocate capital if they're investing in infrastructure based on hydrocarbons, the very thing they need to get out of poverty. That's treasonous, in my opinion. I think companies that are aligning with the Paris Accords should be held before Congress and called accordingly. They are, in my opinion, they are treasonous. It's an anti-American agenda. President Trump calls it a scam. We need to get companies to get rid of political agendas and move back to neutral, as they say. And so I just love Chris Wright and the work that he's doing, promoting affordable and reliable energy. He's doing great work. Tricia, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, so Jason, I like that you showed that clip at the end because it's really good. I mean, I know you and I are both friends with Chris and fans of his, and so he does such a great job explaining that. But I think you got to appreciate that the Paris Climate Accords and the Paris Agenda is the United Nations that is heavily influenced by China. I mean, there's only one country that benefits. You know, they produce all the CO2 emissions. Over 13,000 million tons of CO2 emissions is China. We're on a decline. We're 5,000 and change. It's a fraction. So the U.S. we're not even competing head to head here. So, you know, unless you're willing to say China, stop doing this, which no one is. I mean, I love Chris Wright because one of our first podcasts we did together is we were talking about propane and how much I love propane.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's just this incredible, you know, propane is awesome. And I mean, sit by campfire, see that, like, the heat within propane and what that can do for people in Africa, what that can do for people across the world, especially in the developing world, because you can transport it so easily. I mean, it's seismic change you can do with little things. And I think what, you know, they're bettering human lives, what they've done with propane is it's just awesome. And we can do that, you know, natural gas, the fact that we produce 130 billion cubic feet per day and our natural gas prices are so low, we need to export more of it. I mean, there's just all kinds of knock-on benefits of the U.S. being able to produce more and exporting more. And so this directly relates to the fact that, you know, we have all this energy. We have no excuse to have high cost energy. And so we need to be doing more of this. And, you know, I care about the facts and the data. You can get more of that, how it gets into the market, you know, how you actually, you know, I work with a lot of CEOs and C-suites and companies in knowing this stuff and educating folks. But you can find me on LinkedIn. That's where a lot of people reach out. So a lot of short videos and stuff on LinkedIn. Trisha Curtis at PetroNerds on LinkedIn. I do have a Trisha J Coffee handle because I love coffee on Twitter.
Coffee and carbon. It's like we should have a show almost.
Yeah. And then you can also find me on, you can reach out directly at the website at petronerds.com at the contact us page. And yeah, you know, Jason and I will be doing a lot more work together on this is a really, you know, I love being the economist from the American Energy Institute, and we have a lot of op-eds. I have 2 recent ones on China. There's going to be more coming out. So just look forward to more work. And Jason and I'm going to be spending a little more time in Washington, or hopefully popping into Washington. So we'll get more of a feedback loop. So yeah.
Right.
And if you're a member, you get.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and if you're a member of American Energy Institute, you get more of a deep dive and Q&A and all kinds of things.
Yeah. So if you're a company that supports free markets, anti-subsidies, anti-ESG and DEI, want to join a trade organization that's really going to fight for those values, to lift the rest of the world out of poverty, to try to get energy to those 7 billion people, that fights for affordable and reliable energy. Our mission statement's very short: liberate American energy. If you're a business and wants to join us, let me know. You can reach us at AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. You can find me at Isaac4Energy, all spelled out. And I wanted to tell you, keep living a high carbon lifestyle. Thanks for joining. If there are any policymakers or staff of policymakers on that want briefings from either Tricia or myself or anybody here at the American Energy Institute, or anybody that may be in our coalition fighting for affordable, reliable energy around the United States, just let me know. You can reach us again, AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. Find me on X at Isaac4Energy. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back with some more updates because, gosh, there's a lot happening on this space, and we need to talk about it, try to educate people more around the country. God bless. Keep living the high carbon lifestyle.
All right. Thanks, Jason.